Thank you very much, Kizza Besigye, your words. And of course, this is Straight Talk Africa coming to you live from Washington. And here, of course, I have to say frankly that we are profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled. Once again, of course, to have the opportunity to host you, Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, a former Ugandan presidential candidate, not once, not twice, not 3 times. Guess what? 4 times.
Thank you. It's always my pleasure to be here, and I have been here for quite a while. It's so funny that whenever I'm here, I'm always in some kind of trouble.
Really?
I was first here in 2001.
That is correct.
The first time I contested. And as you know, I had just run away from Uganda then. Well, I didn't run away this time, but I am a prisoner.
You are a prisoner?
I'm only out on bail.
Well?
And glad to be here.
You are a prisoner. What about the rest of the Ugandan people? Are they free?
No, frankly not. In fact, when I was in prison, which I was until about a month ago, people who came to see me were telling me that the trending T-shirts in town then was that we are all prisoners.
Really?
And that's what they were telling me, that there was no difference between me who was inside and them who were outside. So that is unfortunately the situation in our country, I'm afraid.
It's very interesting because, you know, there is a very great and distinguished political prisoner who spent 27.5 years under the apartheid conditions. I remember that once he said they negotiated his release, actually. At one point they said, you know what, you're free to go back to Soweto. And he said, you know what, there's no way I can leave prison to go and live in a larger prison. Until, of course, everything is negotiated to the extent that we actually get real democracy.
And by the way, Shaka, talking about prison, you see, it is actually not a matter of just Uganda. I think what our people on the continent ought to realize is that we are simply going through a very painful decolonization process. Because frankly, all citizens of Africa lost citizenship when we were colonized.
But when we were colonized, we were not citizens, we were subjects.
Yes, well, we were at least, we were in different states of, you know, ownership of our areas, of our territories where we lived. Some were total subjects, some were not. Some, and I know, you know, the Bachiga where you come from were not entirely subjects, as you know.
They couldn't have been free.
So, but uniformly, even those who were making some of us subjects were also made subjects. So everybody on the continent became a subject.
Correct.
Whether you were a king, whether you were a commoner, we all became subjects of different capitals outside Africa. And that situation, frankly, hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed.
We only have different people in charge, but the situation remains exactly the same. Citizens have no power, have no rights, are not really involved in decision making, and they live at the pleasure of those who are supposed to be their leaders, and that is the thing that must change. And unless it changes, talking about these elections is talking about something that you know, cannot happen. You cannot have, you know, someone with absolute authority, absolute power, organizing an election to take away that power from him.
Very interesting. Why did you go to the bush back in 1981? I thought you actually argued that someone had stolen an election.
Yes.
And that, in fact, your justification was to restore what you characterized as merit-party democracy.
Yes.
So what happened? You now have a merit-party democracy in Uganda.
Well, what happened is actually that we succeeded. We indeed took up arms, fought, and removed a regime that we believed had usurped the power of the people. What clearly failed was the intention we had of transferring power back to its legitimate to its legitimate place the people of Uganda. And that, I'm afraid, will remain the case. Because, as you know, Uganda is a very classical case, where since independence, no leader has ever handed over power peacefully to another leader.
That's true.
So the only method of transferring power is guns. And that is very, instructive, because it means that power resides in the guns. You need guns to take power from these guns, and it goes to different guns, but it doesn't go to the people.
Very interesting. Major General Kahindo Tafile, are you there?
Yes, I am, and I'm listening.
What about you, my good brother? You, in fact, too, went to the bush. They called it well back in 1981. To do what?
Yes, I did.
What did you go to the bush to do?
I went to the bush to do transformation. And as far as I'm concerned, the question was not elections. The question was committing class suicide in order to liberate the people of Uganda mentally, physically, economically.
Speak a little louder, I can't hear you well.
I'm afraid we are having transmission problems via the Skype. I frankly don't seem to be understanding what you're saying. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I hear you very clearly.
Yes, I was asking you, what was the justification for going to the bush? Wasn't it to restore what you characterize as a multi-party democracy? And in fact, hasn't the Ugandan president at one time said, I brought you democracy?
When I went to the bush, mine was not what you think. I didn't romanticize struggle. I committed class suicide in order to liberate our people mentally, physically, economically, and socially. In the pursuit of this, democracy was one aspect of liberation. I went to fight the neo-colonial state that had been left behind by the colonialism. I went to fight in order to end the slave mentality of aping what is not ours. And it's a painful, painstaking process. It takes time. Like I told you before, the tools we use to transform society in Uganda is the population. That population has had varied history, traumatic history, and neo-colonial orientation in many ways. Philosophically, psychologically, socially, economically. That's why we have problems with the leadership that apes what we think is best in other areas, especially the West. You are trying to compare two systems that are not congruent, that traverse parallels. If America is democratic, how come black people are being gunned down in broad daylight by state authorities? And there is apparent helplessness in stopping that phenomenon.
I see.
So my going to the bush was not about what you people call democracy. Mine was mental liberation, philosophical approach to the situation obtaining on the continent. And mine was not for Uganda only. Remember, Shaka, I'm the global chairman of the Pan-African movement, the global chairman of the Pan-African movement. Mine is a quest that is greater than the African province of Uganda.
I remember, of course, you were a very good buddy of my friend, the late Dr. Tajuddin Abdurrahim. Is that correct?
Yes, God bless his poor soul, is dead. It's not only Tajuddin. I have rubbed shoulders with the late Professor Abrahaman Babu, Karim Yusak, and many other Pan-Africanists. Ours is an ideological struggle. It not sheer romanticism of democratic practice. We don't romanticize revolution, no.
I see. I see. I think your point is well made, General Kahindo Tafire. Let me come back here in the studio, Dr. Besigye. We're talking about democracy, really, in Uganda and the rule of law. Let's look at a report card. You were not able to watch the package, but was simply talking about pretty much the status of what democracy is or may not be in Uganda. On the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 0 being the lowest, how would you rate democracy in the context of democracy and rule of law in Uganda, and why?
Well, I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to, put a mark on that scale. But I think one just needs to look, and I'm happy that my brother Ndugu Tafire has been very clear about what it was the struggle we engaged in had been about. The question of Ugandans having a stake in and making decisions that influence what goes on in the country is at the heart of all the things that he's talking about. Whether it's social, economic, whatever transformation, it must start with people having control over their country, having control over the institutions.
So has that happened so far?
Quite obviously not, and I'm sure he knows that. He knows that. You cannot, if he says he did not go to the bush because of an election in 1980, 81, or the election of following the election of 1980, then quite obviously he should have gone to the bush even much, much earlier. But the thing is that after independence, there was hope that indeed people would exercise the power that had been taken away from them. In any case, they had more or less been given the view that they could elect their leaders. But, what has been happening now, and I'm sure Ndugu Tafire knows, that the citizens whom he has been seeing being beaten at will by people who are supposed to protect them, if those are the owners of the country that you are, clobbering and sometimes shooting wantonly and killing, are the ones who are supposed to be making decisions and managing institutions of their country. It's a joke.
So what if somebody says perhaps in fact the political elite in Uganda may in fact have accomplished that goal?
Accomplished the goal of?
The goal that, which was supposed, of course, to reflect the liberation of the ordinary Ugandan citizens.
Of course. What happened, and this is the point that, a central point behind the processes in Africa, because, mark you, all the conflicts in Africa are internal conflicts.
Well, unfortunately, there is no democracy in Studio 52. If the producer says you go, you have to go just like a good soldier. You are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more of a discussion in a moment. But first, here is Mariama Jaro. Take it away, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. Still to come, we'll reveal some of the feedback we've received from our audience through social media. Stay with us.
So this is...
Today's youth are not just the next generation of African leaders, they are today's leaders. And this is the time to invest in them. Today, not tomorrow. So let's connect. Let's engage with each other on issues that will transform our societies. Innovation, leadership, entrepreneurship, things that you're doing to move the continent forward, to make you the greatest generation that Africa has known. It's Up Front every Wednesday, 17:30 UTC, right here on the Voice of America.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number is 202-619-3111 and the U.S. country code is 1. Call us direct and we'll call you right back. Remember to turn down the volume on your radio or television and keep your comments brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther Giziu Yuwat, and of course you are welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. Once again, it's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Mariama. Take it away again, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. In February, President Yoweri Museveni extended his 30-year grip on power in Uganda, despite a massive outcry from the opposition and some in the international community. Opposition leader Kizza Besigye, who's here today, we're happy to host him, and who's had countless arrests, insist he won the presidential election. According to the country's official results, Museveni won with over 60% of the votes. A country that doesn't have term limits does have age limit, and Museveni, who's 71 right now, would technically not be qualified to run again in 2021. But that's a long way, and so much can happen between now and then. This leads us to our question of the week, which asks, what can be done to ensure that democratic principles are being upheld in Uganda? Well, starting off the conversation is one of our followers in Nigeria in our letter of the week. Yahya Ahmed Gumel from Jigawa in Nigeria writes, democratic principles can only be upheld in Uganda when Ugandans fully understand and take the ownership of their struggle for free and fair elections, good governance, and the rule of law. Ugandan civil society and democratic institutions should collaborate to rescue the nation from the firm grip from political demagogues whose words are never met with actions. Well, that was Yahya Ahmed Gumel in Jigawa, Nigeria. Thanks again, everyone, for using all our social media platforms to communicate to us. Before we move on to more comments, just a quick reminder that we are tweeting live today. Just use the hashtag #UgandaDemocracy. And if you haven't yet, do follow us on Twitter. Speaking of it, let's go to a tweet from Edgar Kawa, who writes, most likely the independent, in quotes he put, electoral commission will select for them, as it is usually the case in most African countries. Well, another tweet, this time from Emmanuel Kachele, points out that democratic principles in Uganda can only be upheld if Ugandans say no to dateless presidencies and nepotism. One final tweet from Peter Isaac says that better management of elections, elections observers from United Nations, and also country constitution be followed. Well, now to a comment from a Facebook follower this time. His name is Mani Alcado Kasi from Panda, Tanzania, who writes, when I see Africa, I see no hope for democracy and tranquility. The only way to ensure the implementation of democratic principles in Uganda is to be democratic. And that is the thing Africa and its incumbent leaders will not take into consideration. Voters are becoming poorer, and the relatives of leaders are increasingly sharing the national cake. Well, that's quite a colorful comment here, Shaka and guests. What do you make of all these opinions expressed by our audience?
Very interesting. The good General Kahinda Otafire, your reaction to that, please.
You see, where we differ is your definition of democracy. For quite a number of the elite in Africa, their view of democracy is elitist. It's periodic participation in elections. As far as I'm concerned, democracy is participation. All through, from top to bottom, especially at grassroots. I don't care who is president of Uganda, for as long as the LC1, that local council one, determines how it does its work. The president supervises, superintends over a system. If it's democratic, it means the citizens are participating in day-to-day management of their affairs. When they are happy in their localities and communities, then the country will be stable. What is happening in Africa generally is contest for power and authority by the elite. And that elitist view of democracy does not augur well for this continent. Take care of the people. Take care of the people, and the nation will take care of itself. So when you say, unless we manage our elections properly, what about popular participation by the population on a daily basis in the process of managing their lives?
So basically, if I heard you correctly, General Kahindo Tafire, frankly, you are comfortable with the perhaps the definition of democracy as being a government of some people, by some people, for some people, of which, of course, you are part of, the elite.
No. That's your definition. That's not my definition. That's what the elite in Africa is trying to rein us into. They are trying to squeeze us into that very definition. Some of us are saying, no, democracy is order. Ideologically, for me, democracy is the population managing its own affairs.
I hear you, General. I hear you, and let's go back to Mariama for more audience reaction, please.
Well, let's look at a Facebook comment from Prince Nukula Herbert Wairagara Jr. I think I got his name all in. He's from Kampala, and he writes that Ugandans need to rise up and demand the respect of democratic principles because the current leadership does not seem to want to provide it. Let's take a look at another comment while we are there, this time from Goa Saspranik from Monrovia in Liberia, who says that Uganda is a presidential republic in which the president of Uganda is both the head of state and head of government. There is a multi-party system. The executive power is exercised by the government. The Ugandan president is elected by a popular vote for a five-year term. These are all products of democracy. The head of state needs to uphold the things that I have outlined. Well, that's a very interesting posting from Goa. Once again, Shaka and Guess, your thoughts on this.
Your reaction, the good doctor.
Well, first of all, maybe to react to the last comment about there being a republic with a president that is elected every 5 years. Yes, that's true. But the question is, elected by who?
You have periodic elections, don't you?
Yes. And
but what type of elections are they?
You see, these comments actually are very good that they come out in respect of Uganda, because the Ugandan leader now, I don't call him president because I don't think he is.
Why?
Because you become president through a process that he has not gone through. He became president by using guns. He did not become president through an election. He became a president by waging war and taking the reins of power by force.
But what about since 1996?
Yes. And so he went to war precisely for the point you talked about, that elections were meaningless, because there had been an election in which he had participated. And he said this election is meaningless. The institutions are meaningless. Because if he had respected, for example, Parliament, that Parliament can change the system, he would have gone to Parliament. Parliament would have maybe carried out reforms. But the institutions, you see what we are talking about, which is the point I made at the beginning. where power is controlled by a handful of people using the force of coercion. All institutions of state are controlled by individuals. And this is why the point Mr. Otafire makes is redundant, because you cannot talk about citizens participating when they don't control institutions.
But
because they participate through what? How do those people, he calls the people in the villages, how do they control resources?
But
who distributes the resources in the country?
Kizza Besigye, in 2005,
yes,
the Ugandan government changed the constitution, essentially lifting term limits.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
And of course going for what some would characterize as a presidential monarch.
Yes.
But when the president was taking task on that, President Museveni said he succumbed to pressure. So which pressure must he have been talking about? Obviously, he must have been talking about the Ugandan people.
Yes, but you see, if there was any kind of pressure from the Ugandan people, you would not need to use force to keep the people down.
Or to facilitate the members of parliament in order to change
absolutely, or to pay money to members of parliament, not only paying, but coercion, actually coercing others, because you remember they had to lift the change the rules of parliament so that they could vote by show of hands. He could not trust that even after paying them, they could vote secretly and do what he wanted.
I'm afraid time is not our best ally, but we shall continue with the discussion. Thanks, Mariama, for bringing us this week's audience reaction.
Well, that will do it for today's social media segment. Just a reminder that we appreciate all the feedback, whether it's in social media form or using other means to communicate to us. Please keep them coming. If you are a new fan, just drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com. Or post your comment on our Facebook page. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com, or you can join our YouTube channel. Sign up to VOA TV to Africa, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. Another reminder that the show is streaming live every Wednesday. Just go to the VOA Straight Talk Africa TV program page on our website, or simply watch us live on your mobile device. Just download the VOA mobile app. Now, let's take a look at what's on tap for next week's program. Next week on Straight Talk Africa, choosing the hero, my improbable journey and the rise of Africa's first woman president. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the 2012 Nobel Peace Prize winner and president of Liberia, is a subject of a new book by Riva Levinson. An in-depth discussion on the life and career of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is next week, right here on Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back, and today, of course, we are talking about democracy and rule of law in Uganda. Our distinguished guests are Dr. Kizza Besigye, a former Ugandan presidential candidate, and retired Major General Kahinda Otafire, the Ugandan Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. He joins us via Skype from the Ugandan southwestern town of Mbarara. Gentlemen, I have to say that I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Shaka.
You're most welcome. Let me come to you, General Kahinda Otafire. Let me ask you this question. As Minister of Justice, how do you respond to critics and especially human rights groups, both local and international, who accuse the government for governing a society that suffers from what they characterize as a deficit of socio-economic justice?
Well, first of all, I don't understand what they're trying to tell me. I happen to be Minister responsible for Justice and Constitutional Affairs, and therefore steward of observance of human rights human rights. And indeed, I have the Uganda Human Rights Commission within the ministry, and I get feedback from what transpires within the country. Like I said in the beginning, our society has been traumatized. It's come through a painful process of change. We as a government are doing our level best to ensure observance of human rights. I didn't say we are 100%. Okay, no. And I don't know how many societies on earth, in this planet, can claim to be 100%. If the societies we emulate were perfect, there wouldn't be any Guantanamos.
Yes.
There wouldn't be any outcries in certain places I don't want to talk about. The fact that these situations arise means that everybody, in the process of observance of human rights, is dictated to by what we call realpolitik, the objective conditions obtaining on the ground and in the country. Take, for example, we have an election. It's conducted by the Electoral Commission. The election is concluded. The Electoral Commission says President Museveni has won.
An electoral commission that, of course, critics say is partisan.
And my good brother, Dr. Kizza Besigye, says, no, he didn't win. He says we are going to have a program of defiance. Of course, he is entitled to demonstration. He is entitled to manifestation. He is entitled to...
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, General Tafile. Unfortunately, time happens not to be our best ally. I have to go to the lifeline of the show, which are the telephone callers. Let me go to Ghana. Good evening, Tafa. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Hello, good evening, Shaka.
Terrific. How are you?
I'm great, Shaka. What about you, sir?
Well, what is your question, Tafa?
Shaka, I have a few comments to make about your guest.
You have a minute. You have a minute, Tafa. A minute, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let me comment Dr. Kizza Besigye, one of the few opposition leaders I have a lot of respect for. Because considering the nature of the Ugandan leader, we all know that Uganda there's no democracy. And you have somebody like him fighting for democracy. We should continue until the Ugandan people are free. Because when you look at what's happening in Uganda, Uganda has a very good people, intellectuals like you people. But your president is embarrassing Uganda and Africa as a whole. So I will appeal to him, he should continue. Africa is behind him. We are behind him. We continue to pray for him. So that Africa #1 tyrant dictator will be moved in power. Have a good evening, Shaka. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's go to Suleiman in South Africa. Good evening, Suleiman. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa. Suleiman, are you there? Are you there, Suleiman? I'm afraid. I'm afraid I cannot hear Suleiman. What about Amon from Uganda?
And the Canada Dr. Kizza Besigye, the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs in Uganda. This is Amon Kanwansa from Uganda. My question here, I would like also to talk about the issue of, about the human rights and democracy in Uganda. Of course, since we had elections in Trump, what had happened is shows that since independence up to now, we have never practiced democracy, whereby Colonel Dr. Kizza, who is trying to make his first attempt to Ugandan State House, has been arrested for several times. So I think Uganda and the entire Africa, we have a problem of human rights, because when we find that some people are treated like animals. They are treated like people who cannot even live in their country. So I think it is a problem in Uganda. We need to have a great prayer for Ugandans under the democracy.
Thank you. Thank you. I think your point is well made. Let me come to you, Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye. You stated before February 2016 general elections that you wouldn't participate in any poll if fundamental electoral reforms hadn't been carried out. Why did you participate in an exercise that you knew was flawed?
Yes, because as I told you, the struggle at hand is really not for choosing a leader. The struggle at hand is really a liberation struggle, a struggle to change power, distribute power, to take power from the hands of few to the hands of the majority. And that struggle can be advanced through different processes. An election can be a good opportunity. That's why in the last election we said we are going this election to win not just by campaigning and voting, campaign via defiance, but to win by defiance. And what we mean by defiance is that the people of we awaken the people of Uganda to do what they need to do, to defy the injustice that is there, including the injustices in the election, because the election is patently unjust. The Electoral Commission that organizes it is a walking stick of Mr. Museveni. The security institutions that are supposed to ensure security and stability are enforcers of Mr. Museveni's will, and so on and so forth. So we had to defy all these in order to win. And let me...
But don't you remember the words of Nobel laureate Albert Einstein, who once said that if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, and it must be a sort of insanity.
Happily, it cannot be the same thing because the results are different.
How are they different?
Let me tell you, and all our listeners and viewers out there.
Time is not a best Mr. Besigye. Go ahead.
Uganda is different now. The people of Uganda are awake. And that is why, indeed, in the last election, we won by defiance. What may not be known to people who are outside Uganda is that this time around, Mr. Museveni did not steal the vote. He used the guns to overthrow the will of the people of Uganda. We have evidence still in my possession, and which we have been demanding for an opportunity to present to the public in an internationally supervised audit. Evidence to show that we won the election by 52%. We have that evidence in hand.
Unfortunately.
And happily, the people of Uganda are saying we shall not allow Mr. Museveni to usurp our power this time.
Unfortunately.
And I am confident that Mr. Museveni may have sown himself in, but he's not going to exert his will as he has been doing before over our people. Our people are awake. All those who are listening know that Uganda